Oh, fantastic. For you. We're live? Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. I welcome all those present and also those who are watching us online. First item, approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion? Second. Thank you. Those in favor? Aye. Approval of the minutes of our May 5th, 2025 meeting. Do I have a motion? I'll motion. Second. Thank you. First of all, we're going to jump right into our speaker today, who is Kevin Brinson. Kevin was appointed Delaware Chief Climatologist and Director of SEMA, the Center for Environmental Monitoring and Analysis at the University of Delaware in 2024. He was previously Director of DEOS Network, Delaware Environmental Observing System, an Associate State Climatologist. He was one of the two graduate students that helped install the first DEOS station in 2003 and became a DEOS Network first technician in 2007. He holds a PhD in climatology from the University of Delaware. Kevin specializes in environmental sensing, hydroclimatic extremes, applied climatology, and Mesonet operations. Kevin, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Did you come down from Dover?
Middletown, a little north of that. So.
From Dover area?
Well, Middletown, Delaware, just about 30 minutes north of Dover.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So thank you for inviting
joining
me.
us.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Let's see if I can make sure this works. All right. Let's try this. Perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate the offer to come down and talk about climate change and some of the work that we've been doing in our center. Before I even go into the presentation, I'll just say at any time, if you have a question, I'm more conversational when it comes to presenting. So if you have a question about something that you see, feel free to speak up. You don't have to wait to the very end if you don't want to, unless that's what you prefer, Ron. I mean, it doesn't matter to me, but.
No, you got the floor.
Anybody who wants to ask questions, please do. And of course, we can answer questions if there's time at the end as well. So, all right, I'll go forward. So Ron did a great job of reading my little bio there. As it said, I'm a meteorologist and climatologist. I know that's probably a little distinction, but one studies the weather, one studies the climate. I do both. I moved to Delaware in 2002 for graduate school. I did my undergraduate at UNC Asheville in the western part of the state of North Carolina in the mountains there. And then, met my wife, settled down in Delaware, and have been here ever since. As Ron mentioned, we installed the first DEOS weather station, which is the image on the upper right-hand corner up there. That's a picture of myself behind the door of the station and a couple professors and another graduate student installing the first weather station in Porter Reservoir up in Wilmington. Ironically, I think it was the third station that we installed in the DEOS network was right here in Bethany Beach at the boardwalk. It's a little different location where the station is now compared to where it once was. I don't know exactly what stores or anything, but we used to be a little to the left at the end of the street, and we used to talk to a phone modem that was located in the lifeguard station there. And now we're at the very south end of the boardwalk in a great spot down there, and really appreciate you all letting us have the station here on the boardwalk. It's a great site for us, and provides really good weather conditions here in Bethany Beach. Mentioned, I started in 2007 with DEOS. Our network kept growing and eventually needed somebody full-time to take care of it, and that was my job. And over the years, I've had a couple different roles, and finally, last year I became the state climatologist and the director of SEMA when my predecessor, Dan Leathers, who was a professor at the university for many, many years, had retired. About what we do real quick. We started in 2017, but of course the things that are in SEMA consist of the DEOS network, which I mentioned, the weather stations, and the Delaware Climate Office, which that's what the state climatologist oversees. So that's pretty much came together under one name and called it SEMA here in the college at the university. And our job is pretty much what it says here. We monitor the environment of Delaware, primarily for real-time use. So we do a lot of support for emergency management in the state. We also develop various environmental data applications. We have a coastal flood monitoring system. We have an irrigation scheduling tool. We have a water quality data portal. We've developed a lot of different web applications to help make environmental data get out there to the public more. And of course, we provide climate and weather expertise for Delaware, and that's really the state climatologist's job. The Climate Office, we maintain climate records and data sets, so if anybody ever needs weather or climate data, you can contact me or somebody in my group. We can get that for you to help you with whatever you're trying to learn or study. We do regular climate updates, various ones over the years, monthly mostly. I mentioned weather support. Drought monitoring is a big thing of what we do in the Climate Office. That hydroclimatic expertise that Ron mentioned, we study droughts and floods, and everything in between. And of course, we do various research projects from time to time when they come along, such as trying to update the state's climate projections, which is now legislatively mandated. So every 5 years, we have to update the projections of what climate change impacts, or at least not impacts, but climate change itself might look like in Delaware. So I'll kind of go a little bit fast through some of the temperature and precipitation parts, because I know this group's mostly interested in flooding, but I do have some temperature and precip in there, and I'll talk about sea level rise, which is probably more interest to what you're actively working on. But those are the three main topics I'll discuss in the climate change aspects. So we'll look at historical conditions first, and then we'll talk about projections. So temperature, I think everybody realizes it's been getting warmer. In Delaware, it's getting about 3.4 degrees of Fahrenheit, so it's fairly small. That's our average annual temperature. Probably by your day-to-day changes in temperature, 3.4 degrees of Fahrenheit change would not be a big difference, right? If it was 80 today and 84 tomorrow, no big deal. But over time and in a larger climate system and on an annual basis, that's a pretty significant change. And it kind of shows you that it's been, there's been some low spots from time to time. The 60s were a little cooler, but recently we've had almost all of the warmest years in Delaware's history have happened roughly in the last 20, 25 years. Precipitation, we've seen about a 3-inch increase over the last 125 years. Again, not really substantial. If it rained 40 inches this year and 43 inches the next, you probably wouldn't think too much of it. But over time, that can become more significant. It's a fairly mild trend, and I'll also mention that when we look back at our historical precipitation records, what's less notable than the trend up is the variability that we see. And the variability is there. That's our climate in the mid-Atlantic of the United States. We have years with very dry conditions. You can see there's one that's, I can't see, but 1930, right there, it was like just about 26 inches. And then we have 60 inches in I think that was 48 or 50, 1948. But you can see we've had very big extremes, 60 inches one year, 26, and we can see everything in between. So we have a wide variability of precipitation here in the state. Sea level rise trends. Also, the sea level has been increasing. I don't think I need to tell you. If you live down here, if you've been living down here for a while, you've seen it. This is based data from the Lewis tide gauge, which is one of the longest tide gauges that we have records for in our state. And over the last roughly 104 years, which is pretty much how far back the Lewis tide gauge goes, we've seen a 1.5 inch per decade increase in the sea level. So it's a pretty decent trend. You can see it meanders a little bit. We have lots of different astronomical relationships that affect it from year to year, but the general trend has been up. And probably what's more significant is that we've seen a little bit of an acceleration here towards the last 20 to 30 years in terms of sea level rise. This kind of graph here shows you this, this increase in a little bit more condensed manner. So from 1984 to basically 2024, so this is like a 40-year chart here. You can see it's still lots of variability. There's a monthly values that are plotted here, so you can see lots of values, variability from month to month. The one spike you see there, you might remember from 1998. We had a couple nor'easters and a very elevated period of sea level conditions here back around end of January, early February 1998. That's where you see that spike. So there's always variability within the years. But over time, the trend, which is that red line, you can see that it's been increasing. The rate of rise for the last 40 years is about 2.2 inches per decade. So from 1.5 inches over the whole period of record, but 2.2 in most recent history. So again, sea level rise is accelerating. And what does that mean? Well, it means flooding potential. And this is a a graph here of coastal flood frequency, and again, it's for Lewis because that's where we have the longest period of record. We use a threshold that the National Weather Service has set for that gauge. It's called minor. They also have moderate and major thresholds. And the idea is that when it reaches these thresholds, there's certain levels of flooding that you would expect in different communities. And for minor threshold, I looked at it and plotted it and looked at how the flooding might be represented here in Bethany Beach. That might be a situation where Fred Hudson Road floods, like not flooded majorly, but just enough to have water over the road, or the communities or streets around the Loop Canal. Those areas might see some flooding, Pennsylvania Ave, that area. It's not where you have more of that area near the canal, to the west of Route 1. That area you can get certainly flooding in those areas would be more around the moderate flooding threshold. So these are minor threshold is, I don't want to call it nuisance because everybody has their own definition of what a nuisance is, but it's what we sometimes refer to as nuisance flooding. It can happen when you have a very high tide from a new moon or a full moon, that kind of thing.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So is this like a combination of, we have flooding from rain events, we have flooding from storm surge into the back bays. We have flooding on the beach because, storms directly onto the beach. Is this kind of a conglomerate of those, or is it's looking at certain areas where water comes up, or?
This would be pretty much tidal related flooding, so coastal flooding. So this can come in, this flooding would present itself here in Bethany Beach mostly from the back bays or the tides rising up and then the Loop Canal getting, flooding out, that kind of thing. Maybe not so much probably coming in, certainly at minor threshold would not be like the water coming up over the dunes here at Bethany Beach or anything like that. And there's really no rainfall component to what I'm describing right here.
Oh, okay. Because in town, we definitely experience flooding from heavy rain.
Yeah.
When you get a thunderstorm that goes through and it dumps 2 or 3 inches in an hour or so, it overtaxes our storm sewers, and we have streets that are flooded, just the same as coming in from the back bays. So.
Yeah, totally. And what I'm describing is mostly related to sea level rise, which doesn't have precipitation as an element of it. I'll talk a little bit more about precip projections, but I'm not sure that what I'm going to tell you is going to be as helpful in terms of climate change projections for precip trends, just because of the uncertainty that we have with looking at precip projections.
I got a question too.
Yeah.
Based on your chart here, you're talking about mean high water or high water datum. As far as the zero elevation, is that the mean low water?
So mean low water is what you might see typically presented from the Lewis tide gauge.
Right.
And it's useful for navigation purposes especially. Mean high water represents essentially your typical highest high tide of the day, averaged out
right.
over whatever the time period that you're looking
right.
at.
My question is, though, is your zero elevation on this chart at the mean low water, which NOAA uses for weather predictions and how much flooding is going to happen versus NGS, National Geodetic Survey, which uses a zero elevation for doing their surveys on what the land has
Right.
in mass.
Right.
So there's a difference in how they are predicting it on the weather station, how much flooding we're going to get
Right.
versus, because they're calling it from mean low water versus coming at zero elevation. With zero elevation, it'd be almost half of, or at least 3 feet from what they're predicting.
Yeah, and I think that's, this chart here doesn't really talk about levels. This is just presenting number of days per year.
Okay.
We use the National Weather Service's minor flooding threshold as the criteria for saying flood or no flood. So this was just what I'm using this graph to do is just to show that there's an accelerating trend in the number of days that this flood threshold is reached. And that's related to the acceleration in the sea level rise rate, but also to the fact that we've kind of gotten to a point where our sort of baseline level is so elevated that it doesn't take a lot to push us over that little threshold a little bit, more frequently. It used to be back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that most of the floods that occurred back then were primarily due to like coastal storms. You would take some kind of a surge, if you will, to cause the flooding to happen on those days. Now we're talking about days where it's just maybe a sunny day and it's a spring tide or a king tide, and you've got elevated flood levels for the time of year, and you don't have really even any significant weather system happening right now. That's the kind of thing that's changed in the dynamics that are driving the occurrences of flooding. Yeah. But no, I agree with your point. There's flooding that is reported with the weather, flood levels that are reported with the weather that are different than what's actually people see when they go walk outside and say, oh, is it a foot of water on the road or what? Yeah, absolutely. Just a little bit on coastal storms. We've come up with a coastal storm climatology for Delaware. I won't go into the specifics of it, but you can see it meanders a lot over the years. This goes back to 1945. It's not a significant trend. I want to point that out here, but we have seen, at least in just raw observations, that there are a slight uptick. So we're maybe in a elevated period of coastal storm frequencies here. We don't know if this trend will continue or if it will see another dip in the future. We average about 33 coastal storms per year. I know that probably sounds way too large of a number, but when we define coastal storms for this, we're talking about a storm like an organized low pressure system. It can be tropical storms, it can be a nor'easter, it doesn't matter, that go within 200 miles of our coastline, because you don't have to have a low pressure system or a tropical cyclone hit your coast to have the effects, right? We saw that with Aaron not long ago. We didn't have a landfall from Aaron, but it sure had an impact, right? And not every coastal storm's like that. Some of them are pretty small and they just fly right on by. Others are more impactful. Maybe another thing that's a little bit significant, I won't say that this is again a significant trend, but more recently we've seen an increase in the intensity. And we measure intensity in this case by pressure, and generally as you have lower pressures with storms, that's a more intense storm. So these, in more recent storms, and that we've had maybe in the last 20 years or so, have been a little bit more intense than they have been in the past. And I won't speculate on the reasons. There are plenty of studies out there about that. So looking ahead at future projections, I might just skip this part, but basically I'll tell you what we did is we took the large-scale global climate models for the whole Earth that were produced through a number of international collaborations, and using essentially climate analogs or ideas of relating those large-scale patterns to local weather conditions. We took the data from that downscaled data set, they're called downscaled data sets, to come up with a more finer resolution, localized values for Delaware. So essentially taking data that was maybe 50 or so miles in resolution down to a couple miles in resolution. So trying to get that large-scale data to have more local meaning to it. We used 13 different models that showed good performance, accuracy in our part of the country. And by accuracy, we look at the historical climate to assess the accuracy of the model. And then, of course, if it does well in the historical sense, then we have something we can use to look at future conditions. We also looked at 3 different scenarios that are where this type of downscale data is available. Intermediate, high, and very high are the scenarios that are commonly used. There are 2 other scenarios. I'll try to stay out of the specifics of them, but basically what it comes down to is fossil fuel use, technological advancements, whether or not there is a lot of international cooperation and collaboration on solutions to mitigate the problem. It's a complicated thing. It's not my specialty. But the scenarios inform us on the different range of possibilities in future climate. And that's what's important here for what we're trying to do. So this is our mean annual temperature projections. We did it for the whole state. We also did it for climate divisions. There's a northern division, which is basically Newcastle County, and a southern division, which is Kent and Sussex combined. And that's just the classic climate divisions that have been defined going back to the 50s, I believe. And what you can see is that depending on the scenarios, the low and the high, and I should say that really is the intermediate and the high, you're talking about potential by 2100 of 6 degrees Fahrenheit increase or 10 degrees Fahrenheit increase. Keep in mind that for the last 125 years, we've seen about 3.5 degrees of temperature increase. So what we're talking about is the next 75 years, well, actually this goes back to the year 2000, so in 100 years, basically. A doubling essentially at the increase. So it's basically saying we're expecting to see an acceleration in the rate of temperature increase. And this is just the mean annual temperature. We also did it for seasonal and that kind of thing, but I won't have that here. And I'll skip this for the interest of time. Growing season length, for those of you who garden or farm, is pretty interesting. Right now, we are around 200 to 220 days per year, basically between the last freeze in the spring and the first freeze in the fall. By the end of the century, we could be as many as 30 days longer on our growing season. If you go by the low scenario, or 60 days. And you can see that you're getting up close to 300 days by the end of the century under the high scenario. So that's a big difference. It basically means that we won't see very many days where the temperature is below freezing by the end of the century, if that scenario were to come true. I'll skip that real quick. The annual precipitation, like I was saying before, it's still showing a lot of variability, but you can also see there's a small upward trend still in the data here. Depending on your scenario, you're talking about maybe a 2-inch per year increase to a 4-inch per year increase. Historical trend is about 3 inches. So from a trend standpoint, it's not a substantial change from the trend that we've seen in the past. What's probably more interesting about future projections of precipitation is that there's more variability. Okay, we're expecting to see more years where we have higher numbers and more years where we have lower numbers than normal, than what we typically see. This graph, I know it makes it a little bit difficult to see that, but if you look at the red area there, you can see that that curve gets wider, meaning that it covers a wider range of possibilities, and that the frequency in the middle goes down, so that peak is lower. So what we're saying is that we're expecting to see a higher frequency of extremes in the future than what we've seen in the past. And that trend will continue over the next 75 years based off the projections we have. So that makes it a little more difficult to figure out what the potential, how much rain to expect any given year. In terms of extreme precipitation events, we have less certainty on those, and the main reason is because the models, even with the downscaled methods, don't really have an ability to really accurately portray the thunderstorms that are a lot of times the reasons for those extreme precipitation events. It's just harder to see that in a big global climate model and then brought it down to a local level. So we have less certainty in what's happening there. There is a general increase in the number of what we call moderate intensity events. So those are like 1/2 inch to 1 inch type rainfalls. We can see that in the data. But for larger events, say 2 inches in a day or more, we only see in the models 1 to 2 day increase per year over the time frame. So, if you right now, those are typically 1 or 2 days a year now. It could be another day per year. Now that percent-wise is a big deal, but you're going maybe from 1 or 2 days a year to 2 or 3 days a year. It's not a huge increase. But again, I want to emphasize that that's a trend. It's not an indication that you won't have a year in the future where you get 5 or 6 days, because we do have large variability in our precipitation here, or none. So these are the key metrics to point out with temperature and precip. 6 to 10 degree Fahrenheit increase. It's pretty substantial by the end of, compared to our current 30-year normal by the end of the century. 1 to 2 month increase in the length of the growing season by the end of the century. This is akin to like what you might expect if you lived in the southern United States. So instead of Bethany Beach, you're kind of got a growing season like Charleston by the end of the century. Warm nights increase significantly, 10 to 50 days per year. So those are nights where the temperature is over 75. So you don't really get that relief at night. It's kind of an important issue for health and health-related illness. Hot days, of course, number of days over 90 degrees go up substantially by the end of the century. Again, a small increase in precip, and we also see that the variability in annual precipitation increases. And again, we can't say as much about extreme precipitation events, but they do increase slightly. So sea level rise in Delaware. We last updated the sea level rise projections for the state in 2017. We have some long-term historical trends at a couple of sites. I'm going to mostly focus on Lewis since that's the closest station to here. And there's a lot of different things that contribute to sea level rise, including vertical land motion. So I'm sure many of you maybe have heard that while the sea level is rising, we're actually sinking at the same time, and that's because we're doing the isostatic rebound. Basically, we had these glaciers a long time ago that melted, that caused a lot of weight to push down on the crust of the earth north of us, which lifted our area in the mid-Atlantic. So now those glaciers are gone, and very slowly over time, the land is changing. And so that area north of us is actually going up a little bit while we sink a little bit. It's just the fluid dynamics of the Earth's crust. Stereodynamic is another one, and it's a fancy word, but basically it means that when the water gets warmer, it expands. So as we increase the global temperature, the stereodynamic increase could also be significant in terms of sea level rise. We also have ice melt, so we have ice sheets in Antarctica and Greenland. Obviously, if those melt, they're on land right now. If they melt and go into the oceans, that's going to raise the sea levels as well. So those are the main drivers of our sea level rise. Kind of already went over this, but just to show that there's a lot of factors that went into coming up with 5 scenarios. These were published in reports from NOAA back in, I think, 2002 or 2003. So we're just basically taking the 5 scenarios that NOAA used and sort of making them local to Delaware. So this is the state's mean sea level change by 2050. I showed you earlier what we've seen over time, about 1.5 inches per decade over the last 100 or so years, though that's been accelerating more recently. The green line that you see here is showing the trajectory of the observations. So if we assume that we're just going to continue to go at the same rate, that's the green line you see there. And that green line aligns most closely with what we are calling the intermediate low scenario, okay? And in each of those scenarios, again, I think the thing to point out is there's different amounts of ice that's melting off of Greenland or Antarctica. Those are the main factors that differentiate those different scenarios. What's kind of also important is this is what's sort of the most well understood period for sea level rise projections. Once you go out past 2050, the range of possibilities in these projections get very wide. And there's a lot less uncertainty, and that's because we really don't know exactly how much ice is going to melt off the Greenland and Antarctica. So that's where a lot of the uncertainty lies past 2050. But you can see it's a fairly decent, fairly tight spread. This is in feet relative to mean sea level. So here I go, I used another datum here. But you can see it's roughly about a half a foot of differences between the different scenarios. It's not trivial. Half a foot's definitely a big deal, but it's a fairly small spread, relatively speaking. So what we're talking about by 2050 is that if this trend continues, we stay on the intermediate low projections, we're looking at about a 1.3 foot increase in sea level by 2050. That's 25 years from now. That about half of that's already happened, because again, this is relative to 2000. So about another 0.7 or 0.8 feet is what we're kind of looking at between now and 2050, if we assume that things are going to basically keep staying on the trajectory that they're on. I'll skip this, but these are the main factors that are affecting that rise. As I was mentioning before, there's a lot of spread in the projections. If you go past 2050, the scenarios get very wide. And again, that has to do with the fact of how much of the Antarctic ice sheet is going to melt. It's a lot of uncertainty there. Potential sea level rise by 2100 can be anywhere from maybe a couple of feet to 6.5 feet, depending on the scenario that you want to use here. Obviously, either one of those is not good, but 6.5 feet would be a major problem for a lot of places in Delaware. I hope we don't have that. So that's the projections based off of the models that we have. And again, most of that has to do with the ice sheets and some of the temperature affecting the oceans and their expansion. But where does that matter? It matters when it comes down to flooding, in terms of sea level rise affecting the flooding of communities. Again, this is for Lewis because that's where we have the data. By 2050, you can see right now we're sitting at about 50 days per year. And again, this is relative to that minor flood level that I was talking about earlier, that threshold. And by 2050, you're talking about somewhere between 140 to 200 days per year. And so if you just think about when I was trying to describe earlier, minor flooding on Fred Hudson Road, minor flooding around the Loop Canal. Not something that's probably going to stop a lot of people from doing what they're doing, but having, say, 40 or 50 days a year to having 140 to 180 days a year. Okay, that's a pretty significant change. And obviously by 2100, we're talking about potentially almost every day of the year being like that. And that's just based off of where everything elevation-wise is right now. So the key metrics here, got a lot of these things. Sea level rise is increasing at Lewis by about 2.2 per decade over the last 40 years. It's risen about 8.7 inches over the last 40 years. Again, we're about 40 days per year or so reaching that minor flood frequency. And again, we've already had, will likely be by 2050, the sea level at Lewis, and of course that we're not far from that, so the level will probably be very similar here, about 0.7 feet higher. So about a little over half a foot higher than it is today, 25 years from now. 144 to 192 days per year of flooding or minor flood days are possible by 2050, so substantial increase. Again, minor flooding potentially every day of the year by 2100 under the current conditions, what we currently believe. Extreme events, I think that's probably one of those things that's harder to predict, but the annual extreme event would likely would increase by about a foot. And so if you think about that, that's, when I say extreme event, I mean like the 1 year return interval, that one big event that you typically see every year. Right now it's at this level. Based on projections, it would be the same event would be a 1 foot higher event. So the flood level will be a foot higher than it is today. The annual extreme event would be around 6.2 feet above mean high water today, but under the intermediate scenario by 2100. So essentially the current 100-year event, the event that you would expect to happen maybe 1% of the time, would essentially be what we would consider the 100-year event now would be like the 1 year event in 2100. That would be a pretty profound change. I don't know again, that's 2100, and again, we have a lot of spread potential in what the scenarios could be for sea level rise. But if you think about having what you would consider to be the annual event, or sorry, the 100-year event today be your annual event in 2100, that's a big deal. A few resources to point out, just so in case you all are interested. This climate change projections report has not been released. It's been submitted to DNREC. They're currently working on the climate action plan for the state, and so they want to release the two as complementary documents. So that should come out sometime later this year, early 2026. On the left is a coastal flood exposure mapper. It's got sea level rise projections, a lot of the stuff that we use for our study, some of that's in there. It's got floodplains defined. And so you can go in there and do a lot of mapping and look at different parts of, well, Bethany Beach or anywhere else in Delaware and see what the flood exposure looks like. It's a nice website for that. And that's made by NOAA. That's their product. And then recently, Rascal, I don't know if I know that probably the town folks are familiar with Rascal, but I don't know if everybody here is. But basically, there's a collaboration of many communities, practitioners, floodplain folks around the state that work on flood issues in communities. And that group's come up with a community-based research needs document. The URL for it's right here. It's kind of a little bit of a dense read, but it's got a lot of good ideas in it if you're interested in that. Those are good resources. And that is my last slide. So any questions, if there's time, I'll happy to answer them.
Thank you, Kevin.
Comment today. Just two questions. One, you see these reports about the Antarctic ice sheets now. This is being recorded. Thank you for coming today. We see reports about the Antarctic ice sheets, somewhat reforming. Is that reforming impacting these numbers, or is it offset by melting in other places? And two, how fast are we sinking?
How fast would we?
Are we sinking?
Oh, yeah. Thankfully, the sinking rate is not that fast, but it's around maybe a millimeter, a year. But as far as the ice sheets are concerned, I don't know. Again, this is not my area of expertise in terms of Antarctic ice sheet dynamics or anything. But there are a lot of different models that look at all the different scenarios, and that, whether it's a conservative estimate of the ice sheet loss or a more, liberal estimate of that, you get that range that we saw on the graph. And where that ice sheet loss shows up most is not in the next 25 years, because it's still not expected to see any sort of big change in that right now. But the big changes or the big potential changes in those ice sheets is probably more like in the 50 to 100-year range. In fact, some of the models now are showing that the real effects of the ice sheet loss may not even be felt by 2100. It could be even longer than that before some of those impacts get here. So we stop at 2100 because it's convenient, to stop there for the models. But some of those ice sheet modelers are looking at time frames longer than that.
Do we have any other questions?
Can we get a copy of those slides?
That's fine with me.
Yeah, have you sent, I know Will's got them, but I guess I can just get it from him, and then if maybe we can make a list of email addresses and I can have them forwarded. Raylene, could you get that? If you could just give your email address to Raylene in the back, then we can forward them later. Any other questions? Kevin, thank you. That's kind of scary.
I'm not trying to scare anybody.
It's not Halloween yet. Thank you so much for coming, though. It's something we have to be aware of and recognize. Oh, okay. Cool. We would love you to stay right on through. We've got a number of things to cover.
For a few minutes,
and you might find some of it interesting. So,
Absolutely.
I'm going to turn it over to Chip. He's going to give us a little report on exactly one of the items that Kevin was talking about, the Climate Action Plan Committee, Community Action Plan engagement session that took place a couple weeks ago.
Great. Thanks for having me speak on this, Mr. Mayor. And Kevin, thanks for coming. That was a great presentation and a lot of data. It's hard to digest all of that information, but the Climate Action Plan is going to help us do that as well. It's supposed to be a roadmap for moving forward on resilience and emissions control and that kind of thing. Many of you are probably familiar with it. The reason I'm reporting is because our mayor and Bruce Fry, who couldn't be here today, attended the last session. They talked a lot about the stress on energy systems, infrastructure damage, health issues, health risks and land loss, those sorts of things. What I did do is I read all the PowerPoints and handouts, and if you picked up this little paper on the back table, it's sort of a summary of probably 50 pages of documents that are associated with that workshop. I tried to make it, distill it down and boil it down so you all could understand it. I think everything you said, Kevin, applies to us. We got to think about it. I was unaware that we were sinking while sea level was rising. I knew sea level was rising. I didn't know we were also sinking. Thank you for that. Anyway, but I think all of us have recognized that storms are more frequent. They spike. They're worse than they used to be, and then sometimes we have these long dry periods, and people shake their heads and say, "What's going on?" So, I think variability and uncertainty is a big factor, and I'm so glad that the town is on this, working with all the 5 coastal towns and a number of working groups, and have been for several years, to try to make sure we work together on this issue because we all share the same problem. We've got to figure out how to prepare ourselves for these storms in light of things that right now we don't immediately have control over, like melting glaciers. So unless there are questions, that's my report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And be sure you get one of those flyers in the back when you leave. I've got a few resilient items that I'm going to cover. September 5th, DENEREC and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers sponsor an informational event for local, state, and federal legislators up at the Indian River Inlet, where additional dredging to protect Route 1 and replenish the north side of the beach is starting soon, and in fact is already started now. When we were up there, it hadn't started, but if you go up there now, I think you'll see pipes, and I'm not sure the dredge is out there yet, but it will be soon. They also talked about refurbishing the North Jetty, which if you look at it, looks like it's sinking. I don't know whether that's a subject of, it's probably more water storm related than land sinking, but it is definitely deteriorating. So they advised that mobilization is about to start with Great Lakes Dredge Company performing the work. The jetty work, however, is being finalized still and is expected to be a spring 26 start and probably will extend beyond that. They're also have also performed a minor demonstration of the new pump system up there, which moves sand from the south side of the inlet to the north side. Natural migration is south to north of the sand, moving up the peninsula, moving to the north. And thus the inlet blocks that migration. There are actually 2 pumps. One of them pulls water and sand from the beach, and the other pump is pumping the sand over the bridge. There is a pipe system. If you take a close look, it's actually built right into the bridge, and it was built into it when it first was constructed. So it's been there for quite a while. The new pump system has had full trial operations where over an 8-day period, they pumped 15,000 cubic yards of sand from the south side to the north. At that rate, it is expected to pump at least 100,000 cubic yards of sand each year from the south to the north side. Hopefully, this will protect the North Beach as well as Route 1 in the future. We'll see about that, but it certainly will assist. I think if it had been operational the last 5 years, maybe we wouldn't have seen those 2 breaches that we all saw last year. Coastal beach replenishment, hot item. The nor'easter, the winds of August, and Hurricane Erin demonstrated how exposed our beaches are, but also how protective our engineered dune and beach system is. As you saw, you know, the beach and the dune took the hits. The dune came away pretty well. Our crossovers took a little bit of a hit, but all in all, it survived pretty well. If you look back to previous times, that dune system was built in 2006. It has taken a few hits along the way. It was actually breached in 2016. And I think probably many of you can remember that more than half of our dune was gone in many places. We had crossovers, supported crossovers, and stairways going down. I'm assured that they actually still exist. They're just under the dune system right now. So hopefully we don't get to see them again in the future. Beach replenishment here is a need. It's not just a want. Bethany expresses this constantly to our local, state, and federal officials, including through regular monthly meetings with representatives of our governor, and often, just like last night at Delaware League meeting, and September the 5th up at the inlet, we get the opportunity to talk to our federal representatives. And it's nice to see that they hear us. They can't help us a whole lot lately because of our current federal situation. I spoke with Senator Coons' state director last night. Our discussions were not comforting. Washington, unfortunately, is not moving well these days. There is actually a shutdown, which probably is going to happen, and all we can do is keep pushing. We'll see what happens in the future. Hopefully things loosen up. Luckily, one of our senators, Senator Chris Coons, is on the Appropriations Committee, so I would like to think we have a little bit of an up, but unfortunately we're a Democratic state, so maybe we don't. So, on September the 5th up at the inlet, we had a chance to discuss the Back Bay study with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who are actually working on it. And for those who are unfamiliar with this, it is an in-depth study of our back bays to determine future large-scale efforts that can help shelter the coastal towns, including those up on the Delaware Bay, from back bay storm surge flooding. From the study, large-scale protective efforts would be identified, possible efforts would be identified, and hopefully implemented. I was told that this is progressing with a 4-year target, but money barriers may impede this project. So we'll see how that goes. It's not a fast-moving project, as you can tell. The University of Delaware Sea Grant Economic Study, Seaside to State 5, which was completed back in November 2024, has been an invaluable tool demonstrating the economic contribution of the coastal communities to the entire state. I have a couple copies here if anybody would like to see them, but we use it regularly when we talk to local representatives, state representatives, and federal legislators. And they welcome seeing this. It provides some very convincing data on how important our coastal community and all the Delaware coastal communities are, not only to us, but to the entire state. Cliff will discuss some of the current town resilience efforts, but I'd like to just touch on some recent efforts in Bethany West. There is a large swale, almost a canal, which divides Bethany West and Sea Colony. The town, after some heavy rains that we experienced back in the springtime, has cleaned it out, and they've also flushed the Bethany West drain system. Hopefully this helps. I know many of you in Bethany West, I was just talking to some of you from back there, have concerns. I would too. Hopefully this will help. However, we must also recognize that our town is 85% within the 100-year floodplain, even Bethany West. We are a flat town, thus our drainage is slow, runoff and absorption is slow. We have met with Bethany West residents to advise what they can do on their properties to help with runoff and absorption. I want to emphasize this is a team effort. This is not something the town's going to solve totally by themselves. Homeowners can help. Please pick up a copy. We have our Help Bethany Beach Fight Flooding pamphlet, which we've had out for the last couple of years. Please welcome, take some if you would, and whatever you can do on your property, every little bit helps. In the Bethany West, the town is as well seeking grants, studies to fund studies of the area to determine any further action that we might do in that drainage area. So I don't believe that's been filed for yet. It may have been. Terry, has that been filed for?
Mayor, I'll speak to that.
Pardon me?
I'll speak to that in a minute.
Okay, perfect. That kind of runs me down to my things I wanted to talk about. I'm going to turn it over to Cliff so that he can address a few items.
Sure. Picking up where the mayor left off regarding specifically Bethany West, about 85%, excuse me, about 85% of the community drains, if you will, storm water and other tidal water comes into the town from the Loop Canal and drains to the Loop Canal. About 15% of the town, most specifically the western portion of Bethany West, drains into the canal that the mayor just spoke of that runs between Sea Colony and Bethany West. We have put many of our efforts regarding flooding in the other 85% of the town, new initiatives and looking at different ways to enhance that drainage until we have a better idea of where we will stand with our dam at the Loop Canal and the Assawoman, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But regarding the amount of stormwater that enters the canal between Sea Colony and Bethany West, we have applied for back in June. Pannoni Engineering created a grant for us to apply for surface water matching planning grant from the state. It's a matching grant where if we supply $50,000, the state will supply $50,000 to help us develop a more comprehensive plan to help that water in the western portion of Bethany West drain into the canal. One of the negatives that we're aware of, and we've been down some of these roads before, specifically in Bethany West, and drainage into that canal, means that as the plan is developed, we'll be going to the HOA, we'll be going to homeowners and speaking to them about the possibility of removing trees from their backyard so swales can be created that once existed and don't exist anymore because those trees were allowed to grow. We're going to need cooperation from the OHOA. We're going to need cooperation from Bethany West. But the study's moving forward. We applied for the grant in June. We were awarded the grant just last week. I think that's one of the quickest approval periods I think I've ever seen from any grant that we've ever applied for, state or federal. Talking about the Loop Canal, our drainage problems, that tidal flooding we experience throughout town, and just here in the last few weeks, we've had at least 3 or 4 days where 2/5 to easily maybe 1/3 of the town were underwater because of tidal issues. Our flooding comes from the Assawoman Canal and the Loop Canal, both man-made structures, so you could look at our flooding as what man has done to Bethany Beach, because if not for that, we would not have the issues that we do. And that includes even the issues we have from the salt pond. It goes against what you might think that our flooding is caused from the salt pond, drainage coming down from Whites Creek, down from the Indian River Bay, into the tidal marshland, into the salt pond, and into Bethany. But the fact of the matter is, we know, we've documented it well, that the source of our flooding is a push-in from the Assawoman into the loop. With that in mind, we have looked at and have been involved with the creation of a dam at the confluence of the Assawoman and the loop for a number of years. During the last maybe 2 years, 3 years easily of the last administration in the governor's office, our efforts to pursue that dam and have that dam built just sort of died on the vine, if you will. But with the change in administration and the change in the secretary's office at DENREC, our efforts have been embraced. They are working with us. We're having positive dialogues with two people, the two entities that hold deed restrictions on the property where the dam would need to be created. That's U.S. Parks and U.S. Corps. We're having a very positive conversation, dialogue with Parks, and I think once we get through a couple of questions that Parks has, we'll be able to move into a more fruitful dialogue with the Corps as it relates to the construction of the dam. So that's moving in a very positive direction where it had stalled for a good portion of time. Loop Canal has a real impact on the town, and one of the other things we have to do with the Loop Canal is try to at least maintain it. It has not been dredged, I think, since maybe the early 80s, and we have a number of issues with banks deteriorating, most especially in the area that where the Lake Bethany land spit abuts the Loop Canal, which is in the westernmost portion of the loop. And we have, after a number of years of trying to get that permitted and work that through, finally are going to bring to fruition the construction of an 850-foot timber wall abutting the northernmost side of the land spit with a timber wall. A contract has been let to Muirtech, a company based out of Salisbury, for $1.31 million for the construction of that wall. We are waiting for a meeting, contractors meeting, to get a good estimate on when the construction should begin, but it's something that will be done off-season. The other portion of the preservation of that land spit is the construction of a living shoreline on the lake side or the south side of the land spit, and that is something we're in the permitting portion of trying to get done right now, and I don't really have a good estimate on when that permitting will be done. The cost of that is estimated to be approximately $150,000. That's a much smaller project than the construction of the 850-foot timber wall, again, which should be happening fairly soon for us. We've had it done for a while. We've gone back and made a couple of edits, but here in November, we'll probably have a public workshop and present a sea level rise study that Pannoni Engineering has created for the town. I think that'll be a very informative meeting, or possibly even an alarming meeting for many, and it should be a good event, especially for members of the Stormwater team here and people that like to attend your meetings. And Mayor, that's all I have.
Thank you, Cliff.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to open it up for some discussion here.
Okay. Well, first of all, the Lake Bethany, thank you. The Lake Bethany living shoreline, has that gone to public hearing yet? Public notice?
No.
Has not. Okay.
What did you say?
Has it gone to public notice?
Public notice?
Yeah, it's part of the permitting process.
No, we're just beginning the permitting process. for
Okay.
it. The timber wall did not need that.
Yep, and we've discussed that before. The dam, is it possible to get design, concept designs of it? On the website, I've been told there is information on it. The best I can find are 2 drawings that come back from.
So Bob, I have that for you today. We've enlisted Bob. Bob is an avid kayaker and canoer, and one of the things we have to do in our conversations with the park is explore the possibility of creating some sort of a portage from one side of the dam to the other, and we've asked Bob to help us, give us some ideas with that, so I have some of those diagrams for you today.
Okay, terrific, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Fantastic. Okay. Any questions? Comments? Good. Can you grab Will? Oh, there you go.
Thank you for that presentation. It was really thorough. I just had one question. When they're studying the construction of the dam, is part of that study an assessment of where the water goes? Because you dam up in one place, what happens to the water? Does it keep flowing up, or?
So a significant portion of what we have done with the dam study is looking what happens with any offset of water. The dam is designed to only be 3 feet tall. It's a mechanically activated dam. A bladder pushes the steel dam up, it blocks, and it goes down. With the dam only going to 3 feet, there is no impact on any of our environs anywhere up and down the canal. If the dam were a little bit taller, would we push a little bit of water into some guts and gullies within Ocean View? Yes, but we would not be flooding any area. But to make sure that there would be no question about the dam's impact, the dam tops at 3 feet.
There was some incredible modeling that was done by the engineers. I happened to be in the meeting where it was presented to Ocean View and to our local legislators. They were the main ones we had to convince, and they were convinced. So, any other thoughts? Our last item on the agenda, Matt, do you want to say a few words about Bethany homeowners helping the town of Bethany Beach fight flooding?
Yeah, sure. Last but not least. Yeah, so now that vacation season's over, we don't put the signs out during vacation season in pamphlets. We put them out the beginning of September, right after Labor Day, and we've had a pretty good response of people taking them, and hopefully they're applying the information in them, and we'll continue to do that throughout probably October.
Yeah.
And see how the weather goes and the influx of people. You know, if it's a busy weekend, then we put them out. And of course, like Thanksgiving and New Year's and so on.
Because the target here is homeowners.
Right, it's
It's not
homeowners, not the
tourists.
people coming through town.
Right. Homeowners and landowners. So that's who we're trying to, Please, do you mind? We have the microphone?
I can speak loud enough.
Well, the trouble is, there's a lot of people online who are watching, and
A lot of the homeowners associations have meetings over the Columbus holiday weekend. So it might be an idea to get those pamphlets to those meetings so that people would have them.
okay. I know I've passed them in the past to Bethany West. I will reach out again to Bethany West. And
A
to
lot
some
of the other ones do too around that weekend, because the 3-day weekend. They have their annual meetings.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
yes?
Ron, I also think it is available on the website as well, too.
Yeah, it is. It's readily available in multiple locations, so. Okay, any other discussions? Anything else to talk about? I thank everybody for coming, and thanks for those viewing online. I call for adjournment. Thank you, and thank you, Kevin. It was great. That was a great presentation, and A lot to digest. Thank you. Have a good day.